Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to everyone who's joined me this afternoon for this webinar on design. I'm just going to wait just for about another 30 seconds, minute or so, just let the last few stragglers come in and join us, and then we'll begin proper. Hopefully, you can all hear me, certainly, and see on your screens the beginnings of a PowerPoint presentation. I'm not sure if someone can give me a there should be a little questions panel in your available on your screen there. If someone give me just a quick thumbs up or something, just to let me know that everything's okay. Should be okay though. Yes, thank you very much. I can see lots of okays. Thanks everyone, appreciate that. Okay, so yes, what we're going to be doing today, this afternoon, just for the next kind of 45 minutes, an hour or so, is talking about a design within ISO 9001. This is part of our kind of what we're calling a back to basics kind of approach to some of the clauses. One of some of the things that still to this day kind of trip people up, and certainly auditors and clients as well, and maybe consultants sometimes. So we're going to walk through this this clause, some of the kind of ideas and thoughts around it, and hopefully by the end of the session you have a better understanding, or maybe a clarification at least of the clause itself. Okay, so I was going to leave my camera on just for the time being, just while I'm talking through these introductions, but then I'll turn it off so you haven't got to be distracted by my fabulous good looks. Okay, so couple of little housekeeping bits then before we start. Just going to make just a little bit about kind of NQA, obviously, in the first instance. Now, you will get copies of these slides should you so desire, and also there's a recording of this available as well. So it is available for posterity should you want to watch it again. So a little bit about NQA there on the screen. I won't spend too much time on these because obviously, hopefully, this is all reasonably familiar with you guys, and this is not what you're here to listen about. Okay. A few things about our training courses and so on, which obviously I'll remind you of again at the end, and then obviously we'll recap any questions. One thing I would say is just in terms of what you're going to be looking at this afternoon, obviously about 60 minutes or so. Okay, now you have got opportunity. There should be a little question section. I think some of you have found that already. I won't be answering questions as we go along because obviously that will kind of slow things down. What I'll do at the end, I'll answer as many of those as I possibly can kind of over the webinar here. If not, we'll put together kind of a bit of an FAQ, if you like, and issue that out to everyone. So just obviously where it's Friday afternoon, not everyone wants to sit here listening to me talk about things, but we'll see how things go. Okay, like I say, there's a recording of this that'll be made available to everyone afterwards. Okay, so that's me. I am NQA's principal assessor for quality management systems. It's not all about me, so just a bit about me. Obviously, I've been 20 or so years within this industry, auditing in one form or another, worked at various parts of certification bodies, and now with NQA as their principal assessor. So yes, just going to start running through then the main kind of subject this afternoon, which is design. Okay, so the things we're going to be talking about then, what is design? Okay, what is development? Because the standard obviously uses the clauses design and development. Why so confusing, or feared, I suppose, is maybe the better phrase. Does design apply to you or to an organization? Okay, the design stages and then elements of service design, because the standard now talks about design of services as well as design of products, whereas previously it didn't do that. Okay, so there's some of the things we're going to be talking about. So I realise obviously potentially not the most exciting or riveting of subjects on a Friday afternoon, but obviously hopefully I'll keep it as well. It's as interesting as I possibly can, and hopefully you'll get some value from it. So it is a few slides, I'm afraid, but obviously I'm going to be talking over them, explaining the points, and hopefully I'll come away with something by the end of it that's of use to you. Okay. So if everyone's ready to go, I can't see anyone saying anything. They're all good still, right? Excellent. Okay. Well, in that case, then we'll start at the beginning then, which is a logical place for most things. What is design then? Okay, so from an ISO perspective, so in ISOEs, okay, the definition of design is a plan or drawing produced to show the look and function or workings of a building, garment, or other objects before it is made. So that's, if you like, the dictionary definition. Okay, but obviously put into the context of something we can understand. If the organisation, such as yourself, if you're creating something, so be that a tangible thing, such as like a widget, a product, or something that's gets physically manufactured, or an intangible thing, so such as a service, which we'll come on to later. There's almost certainly elements of design and development within that process. So yeah, the physical thing or the service side of things. Okay, they can be covered by design within 9001 certainly, and obviously your management system. Okay. So then what is development then? Okay, because so it can sometimes be a little bit of a sticking point sometimes for people, this idea of design and development. Okay, so the definition of development is the process of developing or being developed. Okay, so straightforward enough so far. So for example, if an organization is providing an existing product or service, but you need to make changes to that or enhance it in some way, the performance or the effectiveness or the end use and so on to meet customer specifications or whatever it may be, then you're developing that product. Okay, so you might visit an organization or as an auditor, or you may be an organization that you've got an established process. Okay, but you might need to tweak that and update it, okay, just to be different to suit, you know, changing legislation or customer requirements or end use or whatever it may be. That's a process of development. Okay, so if you think of it in the context of the internal combustion engine, that was designed an awful long time ago, so somewhere in the region of 100 years ago. So that's the design is fundamentally the same. Okay, but obviously it continues to be developed in terms of efficiency and reliability and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's and therefore that would fall under a development in the sense of ISO 9001. Okay, so not particularly difficult, but sometimes can trip people up. So it's, yes, design and development. It's not just like a one-off design. If you're taking something forward, enhancing it, progressing it, and so on and so forth, for whatever reason. Primarily customer requirements is usually the main thing, which is what we're all about. Okay. So potentially then, why so confusing? Okay, or feared? Okay, so if you go back 7 years, which obviously those of us who've been in the industry for any length of time will remember various versions and iterations of ISO 9001. The previous version, certainly back in 2008 there, it specifically permitted the exclusion of certain clauses, and one of those clauses included design, okay, if they were not related to your management system, okay. 9001 2015, it did away with that idea of exclusion and introduced this idea of applicability. Okay, so it may be something that it's not something that you do, but it could still apply to you as a business, if that makes sense. It's not, sometimes it's a difficult thing to understand. So like it says there, instead of allowing specific exclusions, it uses a more inclusive approach, okay, within that whole scope section of your management system. Okay, and what that states is what's on your screen now. Okay, so the organization shall determine the boundaries and applicability of the quality management system to establish its scope. Okay, so you know, what are you in control of? You know, what can you influence? What influences you? Okay, that needs to be considered by a management system. Okay, and part of that, it says, I'm going on from that, I should say, the organisation shall apply all of the requirements of the international standard, so 9001, if they are applicable within the determined scope of the management system. Okay, so if it applies to you in any way, shape, or form, you can no longer exclude it, whether you choose to or not, if that makes sense. It's you can't choose to exclude something. If it applies to you and it affects your end product or service, you need to apply it within ISO 9001. Okay, you can't opt out of it, sadly. Okay. So the standard then, ISO 9001, okay, it refers to design still, obviously, because it's still a clause within the standard, but in a specific way, okay? And there's a particular way this is worded, and it says the organisation shall establish, implement and maintain a design development process that is appropriate to ensure the subsequent provision of products and services. And that whole idea of subsequent, okay, is quite important, because it's anything that basically comes after, you know, anything that basically the customer sees, anything that you do in terms of product or service, which fundamentally covers everyone in the world in business to some degree. They're going to be affected by this potentially. Okay, so it's quite an all-encompassing clause. Okay, and it's that use of subsequent. It's not a particularly well. If I hold a hands up as an industry, sometimes it's not been particularly clear from day one. I know in a previous life we've started to kind of take the approach that everyone designed in one form or another, because you know you either design a product or service or the processes that lead to that. Okay, but obviously anything that affects subsequent product or product or service can be covered by design. Okay, so yeah, like it says there, reference to product and services, not just products. Okay. Like we said there, often in the past, design has been considered, and indeed 9001 2008 only spoke about products, design development of product. Okay, but now obviously it's inclusive of the term service as well. Okay, like I said, so often in the past, design has been considered to refer only to product design, and exclusions were claimed on this basis. However, in many instances, organizations did, in the past obviously, and now do, in fact, carry out design of the processes and services to ensure that subsequent production and service provision. Okay, so it's not just the tangible widget that you design anymore. If you're providing a service and something that leads to that service happening, there's an element of design there. Okay. Okay, so with this change, obviously that's come about, albeit 7 coming up 8 years ago now. Okay, the emphasis on design. Okay, it kind of changed. Okay, so it's a lot less likely now, as you can see, that an organisation doesn't design as part and parcel of delivering their service or making their product. Okay, it's quite unlikely that a client doesn't design. It still can happen, but it's a lot less likely, like we say. So result of that, certification body auditors and indeed clients and consultants and everyone involved in this process need to be really considerate of when you're setting those statements of applicability, like your scope, okay, to make sure that does this actually design it. It's nothing to be kind of kind of concerned with. It's actually, people can get a bit kind of overwhelmed with the whole idea of design, but it's not the most necessarily the most strenuous thing in the world. And in fact, it's one of the more useful clauses in the standard because it's quite prescriptive on what you should and shouldn't do. Some of the clauses I'm sure you're familiar with are quite woolly, uses phrases, to the extent necessary and that kind of thing. Whereas design is quite explicit on what you should and shouldn't be doing at the various stages with regards to documented information as well. Okay. So does design apply then? Okay, so like we just to kind of push that point home. Okay, so the 2015 or the current version of the standard replaced this idea of exclusion with applicability. Okay, so in some ways, by principle and in theory, most, if not all, requirements are applicable. Okay, certainly when it comes to kind of potentially design. Okay, obviously there are other exclusions that non-applicable clauses that you can state, such as around calibration and so on. But ultimately, it's a bit like purchasing. Okay, if you're just buying tea and coffee and donuts for the office, it doesn't have anything to do with the end product. Well, okay, you can say, well, that doesn't really apply to us. But obviously, it's in any other form. If it affects the end product or service, you can't claim it as non-applicable. It's the same for design. Okay. So like it says there, this means an organisation may choose to consider the entire applicability of the standard and not present any justifications for non-applicability. It might say, look, okay, as a business, we want to apply all of this, the principles and practices and the requirements of the standard, because ultimately it's going to be for the greater good, and it's going to make us, it's going to give us more confidence in terms of assuring quality to the customer. Okay, so all the things we just mentioned there, okay, in terms of design and development, if an organisation, yourselves included, if you conducted any of those, then you can't justify the non-applicability, okay, and that needs to be included within your system, okay. So, for example, it's an example of this might be possible when it might be possible to exclude it, okay, would be if the organisation provided yourself are providing a product or service that's well established, okay, and its design is fixed, and it's just the same thing over and over and over and over again. An example, a client I was at recently, I won't give any details obviously, but they manufacture rotationally molded tanks, okay, and it's to an established specification. They have absolutely no input. It's basically standard items to a set spec, set sheets and run times and everything, and weights and measures and everything, tests and so on. It's an absolute thing. There's no variation. They don't change it. It's been made the same forever and ever. Okay, and it's just the same thing over and over and over again. So there, you could argue, well, we're not having any influence. It doesn't apply to us because we're just making it over and over again. If the tank was to change, or legislation or regulation was to change, and they had to then change that, you might say, actually, we need to consider the applicability of design within our system. But some things just don't require a design within them, or don't apply. Okay. So yeah, sometimes people exclude it. Sometimes, claim non-applicability. Forgive me, use the word exclude. But basically, in the past, people have claimed non-applicability around clause 8.3 because they're making the product fit the customer's requirements. Well, we're making what the customer wants, okay, but ultimately then you're modifying the characteristics of an established product, okay, so therefore you're developing it, okay. Just because the customers, you're saying, well, we're making it to what the customer wants, yeah, but you're applying elements of design and development to your process, okay, so therefore design will be applicable. even though it's the customer specifying it, doesn't matter. Okay, so well, we're just making it to what the customer wants, yes, but you're having to develop it, introduce any revised test and acceptance and materials and so on. You're having to adjust that. So design would apply in those instances. Okay, so like we say, that's development. Okay, so it's important to remember there that any kind of design or development starts with this idea of an input. Okay, and we'll come on to that in a short while. And just because that input comes from an external source, okay, it doesn't mean that you as an organization or the organization is not responsible for the control of design. So it doesn't matter if the specification or input comes from internal or external, is driven by compliance or legislation or whatever it may be. If you're taking charge of that and then having to process it and take it through various steps, then design will apply. Okay. So the long and the short of it then, okay, is that if the organization or an organization uses resources to transform general input requirements for an object, be those tangible or intangible, into more detailed output requirements for the object, then they are designing or developing. So basically, if you're taking something and turn it into something else, be that information, a product, or some materials, whatever it may be, there can be those elements of design development there. Okay, so you can kind of see it's quite rare that that design doesn't apply in some form or another, design development. Okay. So the objective of auditing the design development process then is to determine whether or not the necessary controls are in place to ensure that consistent product and services, that they meet customer requirements and any other regulatory compliance obligations. Okay. But obviously, taking into consideration that for the service organisations, the approach to design development might be a little bit different from traditional manufacturing. Okay, because obviously, it might be different. It's not just you taking into account. We'll come on to more into service organisations in a little while, but it's not that traditional kind of, generating a drawing necessarily and, generating specifications. If you design the service, can be a little bit different, which we'll touch on in a short while. Okay. So yes, you can see kind of really how easy it is to kind of maybe make an incorrect statement for non-applicability within your management system. Okay. Quite often that happens. I see quite a lot of audits that people have said, well, we don't design, the customer tells us what we want and we just turn it into something. Well, you're developing it basically. Okay. So ISO 9001 then refers only to design development of products and services, but in some organisations it might be beneficial, and I do see it to apply this development of processes, within your system. Okay, so it may not affect, it may not be the product or service that's being designed, but you may decide to apply the requirements of design and development within the development of your processes, within the process of your management system and your internal kind of, the way that you work as an organisation. Nothing wrong with that at all. So it essentially it's not client-facing things that are being affected, just your internal things. But you might say, actually, yeah, we're gonna apply design development controls and principles within that because it can help us as part and parcel of all of our quality assurance process. And you can choose to do that. The only way you can choose not to do that is if the client facing the product or service is affected by those decisions. Okay. So yeah, products and service design development is a set of processes for transforming requirements of products and services, so those inputs and so on, into products and services themselves. Okay, so so basically anything that the output of this process is a specific product service characteristics. Okay, so give some examples then of following examples of characteristics that could be an output of design process. Okay, so won't go through them all there, but you can see kind of physical, sensory, behavioral, temporal, ergonomic, and functional, and so on. So all these kind of outputs, if you've seen anything familiar there that kind of looks relative to what you do as an organization, if what you generate as a business, if you're processing something and one of these things looks familiar as an output, then more than likely you are you're developing or designing something in some way. Okay, so they kind of these are some examples of some of the characteristics that will be classed as a a distinguishing feature that will come about as a result of design. Okay, and like we say there, in order to determine if the organisation or you as an organisation, if you're in fact involved in design development, you as auditors or as organisations or quality managers and so on, you need to establish who's responsible for defining that characteristic. Okay, and obviously, and if it's whoever that may be, if it's coming about externally or internally, then it's up to you to make sure that chances are that design applies. Okay. So like we said, obviously, yeah, in some cases you might be able to do it. You might be able to claim that exclusion or non-applicability because it just doesn't affect you. Okay, like I said, that example of the tank manufacturer, it's well-established processes, the same material, the same process, the same machinery with the same equipment, so on and so forth, and over again, nothing changes. Okay, you could argue that there. Okay. One thing to remember, there is a set of requirements, and it's not just design this applies to. You can't consider that non-applicable if the only reason for that is that they're outsourced. Okay, so if you outsource your design, okay, if you say, well, someone else does that, therefore it doesn't apply to us, that's not the case. Okay, because because you've essentially still got control over it as an organization. It's a procured in item. Okay, that needs to be something that you can demonstrate control over. Though the fact that you're not doing it yourself is irrelevant. Okay, it's the fact that we need to be able to see as auditors and you as an organisation, you need to be able to make sure you demonstrate control and put the relevant stages of control and design development, verification and validation in place. Okay. So yeah, if you outsource it, you can't outsource your liability, unfortunately, okay, because you remain responsible for it. The client doesn't necessarily care that it's not you doing it. That as far as they're concerned, it's that they're paying you for the job. And obviously, if you outsource it, that's absolutely fine. Obviously, you can outsource anything you like, but that needs to be it still applies within your management system. Okay, important thing to remember there. So a quick bit then on some of the design stages. So obviously these are the design stages from the standard, so from the clause itself, from clause 8.3. So you've got the planning stage then, so setting up the whole process and your do's and don'ts and wills and won'ts when it comes to design. So any number of things to be considered in there. So talking about project timescales, all those things on there, deliverables, people who are going to be involved, competencies, resources, design review stages, and so on. And the nice thing about these clauses within the standard is that they're very prescriptive. So design is one of the actual, so it's one of the actual easier clauses to audit and implement because the standard's quite prescriptive. Okay, so it does actually list an awful lot of this information as examples. Okay, so number of things to consider during that planning phase. So yeah, what do we need? Who's going to do it? Who's going to be involved? What software are we going to be using? What stages are we going to meet up and how are we going to control changes? And when is the customer going to be involved and so on and so forth? All these things that need to come together to make this planning phase happen. Okay. And then we go into the inputs. Okay, so again, a lot of ISO speak here, if you like, but fundamentally, this is what comes in. This is what the client wants or what's needed to happen. Okay, this is how what needs to be how the product needs to function, and so on and so forth. So yeah, the needs and expectations. So like it says there, materials, dimensions, functionality, life cycle, end of use, and so on. So for those of you who've got 14,001 as well, you can start to see how kind of design influences that as well. So yeah, what needs to happen? How does this need to function? Where is it going to be put to use? What environment is it going to be in? Who's going to be using it? So on and so forth. What statutory and regulatory requirements apply, and so on and so forth. So all of those different things, and you can also include inputs previous design, so kind of lessons learned and things like that. Okay, so the things that would all input into the design process, all that information basically that goes into that front end. Okay. Then you also have to control the design. Okay, so then obviously that design can be that control can be via various software or means and steps and whatever means you've got. Okay, so you look at the various things. Okay, so various criteria here to consider. Okay, so how results going to be? How are we going to know that we've achieved what we needed to achieve? What are going to be the control stages, the checkpoints? Okay, what are the deliverables? What are the acceptance criteria, and so on? How the right reviews taken place? So it's basically same as within the standards. They talk about operational controls and so on. It's basically okay. How are these design controls going to happen? Okay, and then verification, obviously two bits here that kind of often throw people: verification and validation. Okay, but don't necessarily, as with so many things in these ISOs, it's don't overthink it. Okay, too much. It's basically verification of a design is basically that the design outputs, like what you're generating as design, make sure that it meets the input requirements. Okay, so is it, if you've generated a drawing, does it show that it's going to be the right size and shape and color and so on? Okay, you're just basically making sure that what you've designed on paper, for want of a better phrase, okay, that's met those design inputs. Okay, is it going to work as intended? Okay. I suppose if you think like kind of making a cake, okay, you've got all the inputs, okay, what how many tiers is it going to have? What is it going to be, fruit, or is it going to be kind of sponge or whatever it may be? Get all the information from the customer, and and so on and so forth, and what size and shape and so on and so forth. Design it all out, and so and make the recipe. That's essentially the output of design. Then you're going to verify and say, okay, is everything we've said here, all the ingredients match with intolerances and so on and so forth? Does it all fit? Okay, yes, the design's good. Okay, the recipe is good. Okay, that fits what the customer wants. It's going to taste right, it's going to look right, as far as we can possibly tell. Okay, that's the verification stage. Is the recipe good? Okay, and then you go into the validation stage, and that's obviously once we'll continue the cake analogy. Once the cake's actually been made, does it taste good? Does it stand upright? Does it taste good? Kind of, is it exactly what's going on? Once you cut into it, is it all as it needs to be? So some validation, obviously, you won't necessarily know about until it's actually in use or being eaten. If we're using the cake side of things, it's basically it's going to be you validate the design is actually working in the field and it's as it needs to be. Okay. So basically, has it fulfilled the requirements, the customer requirements? Is it absolute? Are you validating something, basically? So yeah, quite easy to kind of overthink and not get confused by, but it does still cause a little bit of confusion in auditing and systems. So you verify that design meets what the customer wants, and then you validate it. Yes, that's actually is functioning and will function, it is functioning in the field as it tastes good, basically. Okay. Okay, so yeah, so like it says there, where validation cannot be carried out prior to delivery, so you might not know it's actually good until it's physically in use. Okay, you need to make sure that any validation does take place as soon as practicable to do so. Okay, it might be during a commission process or something like that, but that nonetheless it can still form part of the validation phase. Okay. So yeah, then the outputs of the design sort of just kind of the phase then that kind of comes before that verification and validation, the actual outputs itself. Then okay, so the outputs of a design can be traditionally kind of drawings, like it says there, specifications, prototypes, that kind of thing. All these things can come out of the design process, and again, this is what you're going to verify against, and then it will lead to basically something being made or a service being provided. These are the outputs. Okay. Changes, same as anything in life, can be subject to or changes, obviously, and when changes do happen within design, the standard asks that you control those changes, be it drawings, prototypes, kind of that kind of thing. Any changes that happen is absolutely fine, but obviously you need to make sure they happen in a controlled manner, that there's authorization, that it's gone through any necessary or verification and validation and so on. Okay, and make sure that changes happen. That's absolutely fine, but don't let them go kind of leading. Don't let them be uncontrolled. Okay, make sure the changes are authorized and as they need to be. Okay, and a lot of this within 9001, you'll see this when you read through the clause. An awful lot of this requires documenting information to show that these things are happening. Okay, in fact, I think in the area clause, part of the design clause requires that. Okay, so obviously when you read through there, so it's a bit more helpful when it comes to telling you what you need to do. Okay. So service design, then we touched on, obviously, we spoke earlier on, traditionally, obviously, 9001 in previous versions was very much focused on product design. I think that's kind of where the sort of the legacy kind of the stigma rests with regards to it's, well, we don't design the product, but no, you can design a service. Well, a lot of people did, and obviously still do, and now 9001 applies to that as well. Okay. So an organization, you may not design the product, but you may design the service, which is absolutely fine. So the design will then obviously apply in that instance. Okay, just because it's not a product doesn't matter. Okay, So just to kind of reiterate on that idea then, so as we mentioned earlier, so according to ISO 9000, okay, a service is the output of an organization with at least one activity necessarily performed between the organization and the customer. Okay, so examples of services then can be something like is there servicing a car service, service schedule on a vehicle, tax returns there, an activity performed on a customer supplied intangible product, e.g. the income statement needed to prepare a tax return. Okay, so hard to think of an accountant designing, but it can be the case. Okay. Obviously service provision, so e.g. in hotels and restaurants, so the delivery of an intangible product, e.g. the delivery of information in the context of knowledge transmission, so training courses and so on and so forth. Okay, these all things come under design. Okay, so it's basically these are services that are being provided that would fall under an applicability of design from 9001 perspective. Okay. So most of our organizations, as you can probably imagine, if you're thinking about your own organizations, you've got an element of service in their product, okay? So that may range from almost like, 100% service industry. So like it says there, examples from around law firms or whatever it may be, to relative, that's kind of what they do as a business, to a relatively small service component in the case of manufacturing, so after sales. So it may not be, so you can kind of see it may apply just to a smaller part of the business. Okay, it may just be, yeah, we're gonna it's part of what we do is like after sales service. Well, okay, we need to design how that's going to work. Kind of what information is going to be provided to the customer, how we're going to support that, make sure that service is as it needs to be. Okay, that's all part of service design. So like we've already said, okay, so the organization should establish, implement and maintain design development process to ensure subsequent production provision of products and services. Okay, so exclusion is no longer applicable, so no longer possible. However, the organization might determine that the requirements no longer apply in terms of your management system, but quite rare in fact. Okay, so for determining their applicability, an organization will have to ensure that the requirements on design development do not affect your ability or responsibility to ensure the conformity of its services and the enhancement of customer satisfaction. So that's the key thing there. Okay, so if anything within your system ultimately can affect conformity of service, enhancements, customer satisfaction, if you've got a control over that or an influence over that, then ultimately there's an element of design within that with regards to the service or product. Okay, not talking about your internal processes necessarily. So you can start to see very rare. It's unusual for design to be able to claim a non-applicability for design. Okay, and just to kind of hammer that home and underline it, okay, when an organisation makes a claim for non-applicability for design, okay, auditors or yourselves as organisations need to see documented information or document some sort of evidence or validation, because there needs to be a statement and justification within your scope, remember, as to why this doesn't apply, okay, that these two conditions are fulfilled. Okay, so the requirement cannot be applied, so there's nowhere in the organisation or within the management system can it be applied logically or practically. Okay, but then also by not applying the requirement, there's no effect on the organisation's ability or responsibility to ensure that conformity of product or service. Okay, so anything that can be proven, then you can accept that non-applicability statement. And remember, 9001 asks that, if you within your management system, although you don't need a manual anymore and that kind of thing, you still need to have your statement of scope and justification for any non-applicable clauses that are being made. Okay. So like we said there, it's quite common just to focus on the whole idea of products, but obviously as we've seen, service provision design comes into this quite heavily as well. Okay, the design development of a service might not be necessarily carried out under, oh, we've not got a design department, we've not got designers as such. We've not got a team of designers that sit down and do drawings and that kind of thing with CAD and so on. But it may be under kind of business development or kind of, that kind of thing, service provision. There's a whole kind of raft of functions within a business that design could apply to. Okay, So you need to be really careful about and think, well, okay, is this affecting what we do as a business? Okay, and is it affecting the customer? Okay, so you can kind of see, okay, yeah, the requirements of ISO 9001 apply to the design development products and services. Not mandatory to apply these requirements to the design development of the processes necessarily, okay, but you may decide to extend the applicability of design to your process internally if it's going to help you kind of keep things as they need to be. Okay. So quite a bit there, obviously, to take in. It's a funny subject. It's kind of like, even after all these years, it still kind of raises questions, certainly for me, during audits, and kind of, you know, clients often, you know, a bit confused. Oh, we don't design, but then it turns out that they do. That, or no, we don't know anything, but you start talking about their service, and they've got elements of, you know, like say after sales and so on and so forth, and it applies to a lot more organizations than maybe not, and certainly maybe a lot more than maybe it feels that it does in the first instance. Okay, so yeah, easy to overthink. As of most things in 9001, it's easy to kind of overthink it, but doesn't always have to be the case. And I think it would, is, like I say, design development, the clauses themselves are very helpful in as much it is very prescriptive on, you know, the kind of documentation you should be keeping, the requirements, and so on and so forth. It's not like some of the more woolly clauses within 9001. Okay, so yeah, have a think. Obviously, consider those things that we've said there. You know, it's obviously, if it's affecting your ability to, you know, I'll come back to the clause there where it says there, okay, important thing to remember. So if it can't be applied, then that's okay. Like, there's no logic to applying it, but then by not applying it, there's no effect on your ability to provide conforming products and services, okay, that ultimately affects customer satisfaction. Okay. So yeah, a few things to think about. Didn't want to overcomplicate it too much, and hopefully it didn't. Obviously, quite a few words for which I apologize. What I'll do now, I'll kind of leave my, I'll put it over here now. I want to try and answer these as I go along. Okay, I'll read some of them out, and we'll see kind of how we're. Okay, if anyone wants to ask questions, by the way, obviously feel free. There should be a panel. You should be able to see it on your screen, on your within there, and I'll kind of see if anything comes up as we're going along. Someone's asked here, what's the outcome in an audit where the organisation says it has excluded design development, but the auditor disagrees? Well, I suppose it's look, I suppose ultimately there's no real kind of opinion here, because you either do or you don't, fundamentally. You know, if there's evidence that design development is taking place in one form or another, be that around product or service, then it applies. You know, but if it gets to the point where there's, you know, arm wrestling and there's a stalemate, then obviously it may need to be escalated back to the CB themselves, like, you know, internally. But it should be fairly, you know, it should be fairly obvious if a client is, or an organisation is designing, and that shouldn't really be an issue. I know sometimes there can still be this legacy stigma, like I've already mentioned a few times. You know, it's the products. We don't design the products. You know, this all comes in, yeah, but there's a service element associated with what you're offering. Is that being designed and developed? Okay. Can still throw things up. So ultimately, I mean, if it could be to the point where, you know, you might have to just carry on the audit and do the best you can, but it's obviously not ideal. It had to be cleared up. Obviously, I suppose arguably there could be, just to sort of underline that, really you'd have to come to a conclusion right there and then, because it would really affect kind of audit time and so on. But to be honest with you, this all should be determined and put to bed during what, like, stage 1 audit, okay, when the client's first going for certification. You should never get to a stage 2 where this is still a question. If there's a query over design subsequently, you know, if an auditor picks up an audit that someone's been into previously, that may be something that needs to be escalated, you know, and discussed within the body itself. So yeah, don't worry too much about it. But yeah, here we are. I took a few questions coming over, so bear with me a moment. So I'll answer these as we go along. So we're saying here, if the organisation changes the supply and/or technical specifications for materials or ingredients, is it considered a design change? So if the organization changes the supplier and or technical specifications for materials or ingredients, it considers design. Well, I suppose, yeah, ultimately, yeah, it's developing the product, isn't it? It depends what's driving that change. I suppose that's the thing. If the changes in the supplier, probably not, you know, because if you can choose to change the supplier if they're supplying the same product, that's neither here nor there. But if there's a change to technical specifications, so, you know, as in that's driven by a customer or compliance obligations or how it's expected to perform in the field, then yeah, that would be considered a development of the product essentially. Okay, and bear in mind as well, you don't need to go kind of full belt and braces, you know, when it comes to this design clause. It may just be, you know, you don't need a full-blown design department to design and develop. Okay, it can just be part and parcel of what you do. It just happens there's design development part activities within that process. Okay, so don't overthink. You don't think you know you've got to go and see, oh, we're going to go to the design department now. No, it may just be part and parcel of what you do as a business, what you do. Okay, your products planning and so on. Hope that helps, Betsy. Question here. So we are, I want to anonymize this if I see any company names coming up, but this is fairly anonymous. We are a brick manufacturer. We opted out of the design clause because the products are well established, but we do new varieties on the old themes to meet customer requirements. From what you said, that will count as development and should be included. Yes, basically, yeah. It's a bit like my internal combustion engine. Okay, the brick's been designed. Okay, a brick is a brick. Well, you know more about that than me, certainly. But obviously, if the customer's coming in and saying, or there's a need for the brick to have different characteristics and performance characteristics in terms of, you know, strength and dimension and so on and so forth, you're developing it. Okay, you may not be doing an off-the-wall conceptual design of the brick because that's been done years ago, but you're developing it and taking on board those specifications and inputs from customers, processing them and developing an output, i.e. a design change, and that could result in a change to materials, the manufacture of the brick itself, test and acceptance, and so on and so forth. So yeah, there's elements of design, the development there. Sorry, yeah. Hang on, lots of questions. So if design is the company's service and the process is regulated, i.e. buildings and architecture, does 8.3 still apply? If design is the company's service, yes, basically, yeah, because you're providing that service, you're designing that. Design is your service, or service is the design. So yes, yeah. And if it's regulated, even more so. Well, not even more so. It does or it doesn't. But yeah, if it's regulated, that comes into your design planning. Remember we spoke about design planning, or I spoke about design planning. That's everything that regulation or those compliance obligations, particularly in architecture, things like, off the top of my head, kind of building regulations and so on and so forth, that would factor into your design planning. And as part of the input, okay, we need to be aware of this. Where does it fit in? Certainly part of the verification phase and ultimately the validation as well. Okay. Hope that's okay, Jonathan. The standard refers to products and services, correct? Where do we stand if we only design or develop in one of these? E.g., we design, develop the product only. Yeah, then you're still design. You don't have to do both, I think is the question that's being asked there. So yeah, I see what you're saying, because it says design and development. Okay, so good point actually. Yeah, it doesn't mean you need to design and develop. It can be one or the other, or both, or any combination there. Well, I think that's probably about it. But yeah, yes, absolutely, that does still apply. Okay. Do the way we manage a project within an organization in terms of documentation, forms or work instructions count as part of design development? Does the way we manage a project within an organization in terms of, okay, so I think this probably comes around to those kind of internal processes. Now, the standard doesn't say that you need to apply design development necessarily to your internal processes as such, but obviously, if it's that phrase that we saw a little while ago, that's subsequent. Okay, so Not necessarily. I mean, it wouldn't expect you to apply design development over, design of your setting up the forms within your management system necessarily. But obviously, if you're starting to look at, if it starts to affect kind of, the way that you communicate with the customer, the way that you engage, the way that things are set out, and the way that you interact and and communicate with your customer, and ultimately then that affects the service, then yes, design would be considered to be applicable there. It's not asking you to kind of apply whole design development principles to design of your your management system as such, but obviously because that although you can choose to apply that because it might be good practice, okay, if it's a certain size or shape, but ultimately if anything within that system then starts to impact service and customer facing product and service, then yes, then there should be design elements applicable to it. Okay. So yeah, good question. Yeah, okay. Okay, I have a number of clients who have all excluded clause 8.3, who all have well-established certified systems, and to date the exclusion has been accepted by their various CBs. Yes, which is yeah, a very valid point. And obviously I don't know the individual clients, but I would say that it's probably a bit of a failure on I don't put anyone under the blame on here, but certainly auditors, certification bodies, UCAS, everyone. There's been a bit of the UCAS put out a position statement a little while back. It'd be accessible on their website, the UCAS website, about kind of the whole service design side of things. And yeah, they kind of think people realize there's still this idea of we don't design a product, that's okay. Yes, but is there a service element associated with what you do? Then obviously, yeah, there could potentially be applicable parts of the of design within that. So yeah, I'll take your point, Darren. It's entirely valid. It's I know in a previous life prior to NQA, I was actually witnessed for our by UCAS for our transition assessment for 9001 2015, and we actually explained to UCAS we took the approach that everyone in some form or another designs. It's almost not impossible, but highly improbable that someone would not design. And they weren't particularly supportive of that, but it seems as though they kind of changed the tune after a while. But I think, Darren, it's going to be one of those things that's going to, as time goes by, and maybe with the next review and iteration of 9001, we might at long last get some clarification on that and some final puts these things to bed. So yeah, I'll take your point, and it's entirely valid. And yeah, but obviously, yes, may not necessarily be be right. Okay. Okay. So, oh, hang on, Jonathan. Yeah, thanks. But doesn't that mean 8.3 and 8.5 are one and the same in this case? So I forget your other question. Right. So I think you asked if is that the same question? Yeah. So you said right. So yes, I'm looking at this. So if design development, this is the original question was if design is the company's service and the process is regulated. Okay, does it apply? So yeah, I see what you're saying, because obviously that is part of your service provision. But if design is your service, I see what you're saying, because obviously production and service provision. But ultimately, your design, that's the thing. That's the whole point of subsequent service provision. Okay, because 8.3 sits before 8.5. So if you're design developing, that affects that subsequent service provision. Because when you're involved in architecture, obviously I'm not an architect, but when you're involved in architecture, obviously you'll be taking clients' inputs, obviously specifications and so on and so forth, and turning those into, I know it's simplified, but processing that into drawings and specifications and bill of quantities and bill of materials and so on. But obviously that is part and parcel of what you do. Yes, they don't have to be exclusive. Okay, the standard works together. It just because I see where you're coming from, but it's yeah, it's 8.3 leads into subsequent service provision. It's that whole, remember that word subsequent in the design clause. Subsequent service provision, if that involves design, well, that's part of the process. If you are providing a service, surely the control of this service is covered under 8.1 and 8.2. Yeah, it depends what this is. You can provide a service. So, for example, if you're a hairdresser, okay, then obviously, yeah, you're providing a service, which would then come under, okay, what does the customer want? I want a short back and sides, number 2, whatever it may be. You can do that, okay. It's not you wouldn't necessarily design that, okay. You're going to get your equipment and make the thing happen. But if you're designing service around, yeah, like I said, we spoke there kind of around like designing a defense if you're a solicitor, or if you're designing a management system if you're a consultant. No, consultants, ISO management system consultants, they design a management system. The customer's telling them what they want, and they're taking the inputs of the requirements of the standard, and you're outputting that. So yeah, I take your point. It's if you're providing a service, then it says there, if you're providing a service, sure, the control of the service is covered. Right? Yes, it is, but obviously only if that service isn't affected by any kind of development or design. So if there's changes to it and you need to adapt it, you're going to be developing it. Okay. It's one of those things you could probably spend all weekend and all afternoon talking about it, but it's and good questions, absolutely. It's one of the things I don't think it's not going to go away soon, and I knew when I when I decided to do this, it was probably going to be one of those subjects that's probably going to haunt me for the rest of my days. But it's, yeah, look, these are the things that have come, obviously my experience of these things, and not my interpretation, because it's not, it needs to be, it's how things are being kind of pushed onto us now as auditors from the regulatory bodies and so on. So we've been asked to look at these things. Okay, it's not just as binary and black and white as it used to be. No, we don't design, we don't do the product. There's service elements as well. And I think the key thing here is that word, that subsequent. Okay, subsequent production and service provision. It's yeah, if it's very, very clear that you're making things to the same specification, using the same materials, using the same processes, using the same equipment, using the same people, yeah, nothing's changing, is it? It's the same thing over and over again. Yeah, but obviously if there's changes to that, then you're modifying as a result of customer specifications or compliance obligations or whatever it may be, or reactions to an environment, whatever it may be, and you're taking one thing and progressing it and changing it, then it's a design or development or a design essentially. Okay. Okay. I think that's, as far as I can see. I'm just going to double check. I think that's all the questions that I can see. Obviously, please feel free to punch any more in. Obviously, we're just coming up to kind of the hour now, so that's kind of what we had set aside. I'm more than happy to kind of answer them. They're the ones as I see them on the screen there. Hopefully I answered it. The ones that, if you put a question there, hopefully I answered it, not only just in words, but sufficiently. But do feel free to, obviously, you'll get copies of the slides and the recording as it stands. If there's any other questions, I'll be more than happy to bounce them back. But again, I'm sure this is something that we're going to probably come back to time and time again. It's hopefully there'll be some clarification soon. But I'm going to wait around here, obviously, until the last person's left the room. If you want to put more questions on, please feel free. If not, just want to thank to everyone for coming along, listening, and I do hope it was helpful. If nothing else, getting brains thinking and as to how you do things. But yeah, appreciate everyone, and enjoy your weekends. Stay safe, and I hope you see you again on another webinar soon. Thanks a lot. I'll keep my eyes open for any questions. Thank you to everyone for who's saying thank you. Yep. Let me see. Okay, yeah, someone's asked a question. Just to, yeah, how much of clause 8.3 has to be applied? Well, you're going to hate me for this, but basically, what applies, you have to apply whatever applies, if that makes sense. So it may be that you may not be necessarily, as an organisation, you may not be responsible for like the validation side, okay? But obviously, because that may be done at the customer's premises, but obviously, you would need to kind of ensure that at least that is happening, okay? Even if you're not got direct control over it, okay? Some of those kind of, it's part of that outsourcing side of things. So yeah, you'd have to apply whatever applies. I know it's an awful answer, but it's if it applies, you need to obviously make sure that you're fulfilling the requirements that do apply within there. Okay, so a bit like from the input side of things. Okay, it's when it comes to design inputs, you might not necessarily specify them, but you're still responsible for sourcing them. Okay, and find out what they are. Okay. Hopefully that helps, Haley. What if you don't get to see it, the results? Oh, okay, so the validation. Well, if you don't, you might not necessarily get to see them, but ultimately, it's well, if the validate, it may be that you're just you may just be involved in part of the design process. Okay, if the validation is agreed to be undertaken by the customer, so it may be there might be something commercially sensitive or sensitive information that you're just not allowed to see. As I don't know, it may be where it may be a component of something that your design is going into something a bigger something. Yeah, but obviously, I suppose you could then say, well, look, that would be written into your terms and conditions and contract and so on, that basically says, look, okay, the validation part of this, we can only go so far. So you can't do what you can't do, if that makes sense. It's you can only make that clear within as part of your process control. Make sure that's understood and clearly defined, okay, within what you do. Hopefully that helps. Rarely that might happen, okay. So yeah, but I can see where you're coming from. Okay, a few people still in the room. I'll wait around just for a little bit longer to see if there's any more questions come through. More than happy to answer those as we go along. If not, I'll give it another couple of minutes. I'll stay until 4 o'clock. So I've got nothing else to do, and then we'll call it into it. Okay. Oh, hang on. Someone, hang on. Me, have a nice weekend. When will the presentation be emailed out? Yeah, okay. So that should be emailed out. It probably won't be today now, but it'll come out. Should come out to you the early part of next week. If you don't receive it through, then just there's an information email that followed on from this that you've had to remind us on. But it should come out the early part of next week. You're welcome. Okay. I'll just give it a couple more minutes, and then I'll hit the stop button, and hopefully see you again soon. Okay, and everyone, for those of you who are left or may still be listening, of listened to the very end of this recording, well done for your staying power. But thanks very much again. I appreciate it, and we hope to see you again soon. Have a nice weekend. Take care. Bye bye.